Every day, around 13 tankers power their way through the Strait of Hormuz into the Arabian Sea. Between them, they carry over 15 million barrels of crude oil, about 1/3 of the world's entire daily seaborne traffic. From the Arabian Sea, they will either head southeast to the oil-thirsty markets of India, China and Southeast Asia, or make their way around to the Red Sea and the Suez Canal as they head up to Europe and North America. The oil in their holds has been extracted from the oil fields, piped to the refineries, and then transported to the ports of the biggest oil-producing region in the world, the Arabian Peninsula. Eventually, this black gold will find its way to depots, manufacturing plants, filling stations, and ultimately, in some form or other, into the lives of each and every one of us. Oil has become an indispensable part of today's society. It fuels the cars we drive, the aeroplanes in which we fly, the trucks and lorries that deliver goods to our shops and supermarkets, the motorsports we watch, and even the rockets we fire into space to further our understanding of the universe. Its derivatives, too, are everywhere. In the pesticides and fertilizers our farmers use to grow our food. In the drugs and medicines our doctors prescribe us to keep healthy. In the packaging of the goods in our shops, and in the paint on our walls. In more ways than one, oil has become the fuel that runs the engine of the world economy. The Arabian Peninsula and the seas of the Arabian Gulf sit on top of some of the largest oil fields in the world. Bigger than Lebanon, the Garwa oil field in Saudi Arabia is by far the largest conventional oil field in the world. It was discovered in 1948 and came on stream 3 years later. In 1981, it set the world record for daily oil production by pumping out an average of 5.7 million barrels a day. That record still stands, and its reserves are estimated to be around 100 billion barrels. Until Garwa overtook it in 1971, Kuwait's Burgan field was the most important oil field in the Middle East. Discovered in 1938, production started in 1946, and its daily output now stands at around 2 million barrels a day. It is responsible for around 75% of Kuwait's oil production, and estimates for its reserves range between 50 and 70 billion barrels. As far back as the 1930s, geophysicists came up with the idea that there could be accessible oil reserves under the waters of the Arabian Gulf. Their hunch was proved correct 12 years later, when the first discovery well was drilled in the Safaniya field, 250 kilometers off the coast of Dahan. It is still one of the largest offshore oil fields in the world, with a production capacity of more than 1.2 million barrels a day and reserves of about 37 billion barrels. The oil from these fields is then processed in some of the biggest refineries in the world, including the Mina Abdullah refinery in Kuwait at 270,000 barrels a day.
Mina Abdullah refinery, built in 1958, and was a small refinery to produce the naphtha and low sulfur fuel oil. And it has been built by the American Oil Company. In 1980s, the KMPC decided to upgrade the existing refinery to a large and full conversion refinery, and the construction activity was completed in 1989, and the commissioning of the refinery has been started in 1989, and during the 1990 the refinery has been stopped because of the Iraqi invasion, and in 1992 the refinery started again. Mina Abdullah refinery has been considered one of the latest and new refinery in Kuwait.
There are two legs to the journey that turn this sticky black liquid in the Arabian Gulf into the world's fuel. The upstream leg, which involves finding and extracting the oil from the earth. And the downstream leg, where its constituent hydrocarbons are cleaned up, separated, and chemically rearranged to make them fit for use in anything from petrol to pharmaceuticals to plastics.
Kuwait in particular has basically only one type of crude, which is called Kuwait export crude, and it is not very wise to rely on a raw material in its form. So Kuwait has early on decided on diversifying its income from the oil. How do you do that? You do it through several ways. One of them is to refine large proportion of that oil. We are producing about 3 million barrels a day of crude in Kuwait, but we refine about 900,000 barrels a day. So we export not only crude oil, we export petroleum products all around the world, to the east and the west. That is one side. The other side is we have downstream facilities in many areas around the world. We are present in around 60 airports where we sell aviation fuel to airplanes. We have refineries in Europe. We have gasoline stations. We have diesel stations that sell these products to Europe. We also have refining projects in the east, in Vietnam and in China, where we hope also to have these investments diversify our income from just selling crude oil. That's one leg. The other leg, of course, is the petrochemical industry, which is an offshoot of the oil industry. We have a vibrant petrochemical industry in Kuwait where we produce products that are used for plastics, for medicines, for all sorts of other things that are used in the homes and the factories all around the world. And we're hoping to expand that industry also outside of Kuwait.
Every upstream company in the world employs an army of geologists and geophysicists who are responsible for analysing rocks and rock formations for the presence of oil. It is their recommendations that can set the upstream process in motion. This process starts with an exploratory survey using aerial photography to identify promising landscape formations. The magnetic method, which measures variations in the intensity of the magnetic field of the rock formations. And seismic mapping, where dynamite, an airgun, or a seismic vibrator is used to send seismic waves into the ground. If everything points to the presence of oil, and enough of it within striking distance, the only way man has so far devised to verify the findings is to drill a borehole or wildcat exploratory well. This involves putting a mobile rig in place and then drilling continuously for up to 2 months while pumping mud or drilling fluid down the drill pipe and back to the surface. If the results are positive, more wells are then drilled nearby to evaluate the size and nature of the reservoir and to decide if further exploratory drilling will be necessary. At this stage, the hard work really begins. New boreholes are drilled, and once oil has been struck, the heavy drill pipe is replaced by lighter weight tubing. The underground pressure is usually intense enough to drive the oil, gas and water in the field up this tubing to the surface. On reaching the surface, the oil, gas and water are routed through the tubing, either to an on-site production and processing plant or piped directly off-site to be processed elsewhere.
I am one of the senior drilling supervisor of the KOC, and I am working here in KOC since last 6 years. And basically there are two drilling groups in KOC. One is the deep drilling group and one is the development drilling group. And this rig, Sinopec 185, is coming under the development drilling group. And we can drill this rig up to 20,000 feet. We have the 4 engines here, 2 mud pumps, and we have 2 800 HP motors here. Mostly around 80 people are working here total. But other than rig crew, we have so many service companies also, they are working with the rig. For any drilling, the basic concept is this, to lift that cutting from the hole to the surface. Otherwise we cannot drill continuously. Mud has many roles in the drilling. Its primary role is to lift the cutting from the bottom to the surface. The secondary role is to lubricate this drilling assembly, and this third role is the cooling the bottom hole assembly and the drill pipe, and the fourth role is to overbalance for this formation pressure, because we don't need the oil while drilling, we need the oil after drilling. So by mud overbalance, we keep the formation pressure under control.
Developing an oil field can involve drilling tens or even hundreds of new boreholes, depending on the size of the deposits, and lots of muscle. This has huge logistical and manpower implications, and running an oil field calls for military levels of planning and organisation. An average size field will typically require housing facilities for 1,000 men, administrative offices, an airstrip, a fire station, recreation areas, maintenance and support workshops, and power stations for generation and distribution. The huge growth in the oil industry's workforce has also seen brand new residential complexes spring up across the Arabian Peninsula, such as Ahmadi on the edge of Kuwait's Bergan oil field.
I come from an oil family. My uncle was with the wireline of Bergan 1, the first well spotted in Kuwait back in 1946. At that time, there was no houses in Ahmadi, no Ahmadi town. It was mainly camps scattered here and there. To me, I was born in Ahmadi and I lived most of my life still in Ahmedi, close to my work, and it is a fairly British village, so I liked it very much. Yeah.
Most of all, however, it requires the skill and commitment of an army of dedicated managers, supervisors and skilled workers.
I started working in KOC at 1979 as a GCA, Gathering Center Attendant, then GCO, Gathering Center Operator, and 1990 I've been shift controller, and before 2 years I'm controller 1 in GC 22. Our work starts at 7 o'clock early morning, and my work to ensure that our production is as a target around 130,000 barrels daily, and to supervise all our production operation, and I have to care about HSE, the safety in our gathering center, and if anybody from our staff has any problem, I hope our production to more than this production, and we are doing our best to push our oil production to 1,035, 36, because we have to be best gathering center in Kuwait.
I have been in 82 in the secondary school. My friend, he was in the refinery. Once time I came to the refinery, I like it. Before finish the secondary school. From that time, I like the refinery, and I like my job. Really, I like my job. I like to work in the operation. And I have been now, as I said, 28 years. I think it's more over.
Yeah, this is a very good country for work, and this is a very friendly country, and I think I have a good job satisfaction over here since I am working here.
Without a short chemistry lesson, it is difficult to fully understand how oil travels from beneath the Earth's surface to affect and improve all of our lives. Crude oil contains hundreds of different hydrocarbons mixed together, which need to be separated and adapted before they can be put to use, either as fuel or in a range of chemicals, fertilizers and plastics. Hydrocarbons are molecules that contain hydrogen and carbon and come in various lengths and structures. Chemists love them because they contain a lot of energy, and they come in all shapes and sizes, from methane gas, which is lighter than air, to long chains, which we know as solids like wax or tar. Two of the most common forms of hydrocarbon are paraffins, including petroleum, gasoline, diesel, and residuals such as coke and tar. Aromatics, which are used in rubbers, lubricants, dyes, detergents, drugs and explosives. Before refining takes place, the oil needs to be separated from the gas and water that rose with it from under the Earth's surface.
We receive around 80 flow lines, 80 wells, where they sum up to 100,000, roughly more than that. We treat the crude. It has become with water, especially after the explosion of all wells back in the destruction days during the liberation from the Iraqi forces. And we separate the gases from the oil. The gases get shipped to the booster stations, where the gases get boosted to ship them to the refineries, where we have further processes to give the consumers, to give the power stations all their requirements. And the oil gets flown to the desalting dehydration system, just to remove all the salts and the crystals from it. And then we ship them to a tank farm. This is a midway station, tank farm we call it, where you would see it around Ahmadi town. And from the tank farm, it goes directly to the ships in the terminals, one in Sheba, the other one is in Abu Halifa. And half of it, let's say, or maybe 1/3 of it, of our production goes to the refineries.
Once this initial separation process is complete, it is transported to the refineries, where further treatment can take place. Most modern GCC refineries now have the capacity to effect this separation using fractional distillation. Hydrocarbons don't only come in different shapes and sizes, they also have different boiling points. The fractional distillation process uses these variations to separate mixtures of substances with narrow differences in the boiling point by heating, vaporizing, condensing, and collecting them in different containers. Chemical processing enables chemists to alter the chemical composition of a hydrocarbon, and therefore its uses, by breaking large ones into smaller pieces. This is known as chemical cracking. Combining smaller pieces to make a larger one, called unification, or rearranging various pieces to make the hydrocarbon they're looking for, called alteration.
The main process unit in the refinery is the fractionation process, where we are using physical separation. The fractionation is started in the main fractionator tower in the crude units, where the crude is preheated and heated in the main furnace in the crude distillation unit. Then through a normal distillation process, we have a different type of products, starting from the lighter products, the LPG, then we have the naphtha, we have the kerosene, we have the diesel, and we have in the bottom of the fractionator is the heavy crude. The second main process is the stabilization, where we have naphtha stabilization and the main crude unit, where we can control the RVP, which is the rate vapor pressure. RVP is the main parameter for controlling and maintain the naphtha products in the storage tank. We have different types of process, for example the chemical cracking or the cracking process. The cracking process is, we have two types of cracking. We have the hydrocracking, where we are using the hydrogen and in high pressure, high temperature process in the hydrocracker unit. And we have the thermal cracking, where we have low pressure but we have high temperature, where this happened in a coker unit. So this is the main four basic process operations in a refinery.
Even so, the capacity of the GCC's refineries is relatively low. While the region is sitting on around half the world's oil reserves, it only owns 10% of its refineries. A major investment program is underway to increase capacity. Saudi Aramco and the China Petrochemical Corporation have committed $10 billion to the upgrade of the Yanbu refinery on Saudi Arabia's Red Sea. In March 2010, Takriya, the Abu Dhabi refining company, signed contracts valued at $9.6 billion for the expansion of its Quoist refinery. Further major investment is in the pipeline to strengthen the links between the oil industry and other downstream sectors, particularly petrochemicals. Saudi Aramco and Dow Chemical have signed an agreement for $20 billion, a joint venture that will produce 3 million tons of chemical products a year. In 2009, Petro Rabigh opened the first integrated refinery and chemicals project in the region. An $8 billion extension is now underway. Our relationship with oil has come a long way. The images of Kuwait's oil wells burning during the First Gulf War were an eerie reminder of man's earliest encounters with oil. On the hillside of Yanadag in Azerbaijan, 10-foot flames jet out into the air as they have done since time immemorial. Their source is the methane gas from the area's hydrocarbon reserves, which was sacred to the Zoroastrian religion more than 2,000 years ago. Since then, successive civilizations have used it as pitch to make waterproof sealant for boats, ships, and wooden containers. The Greeks used it in large jars, which they set alight and floated at enemy ships as a primitive form of mine. They also used it to make medieval flamethrowers. But oil did not really come into its own until Edwin Drake dug the world's very first oil well in Pennsylvania in 1859, 2 years before the outbreak of the American Civil War. His timing was exceptional, because the Civil War effectively brought the New England whaling fleet to a halt, and in the process cut off the United States' principal source of fuel for kerosene lamps, sperm whale blubber. For a time, the demand for kerosene made him a wealthy man, and the industry spread across Indiana, Ohio, and Oklahoma. Economic disaster appeared to have struck the oil industry in 1879, when Thomas Edison invented the light bulb, and demand for kerosene lamps began to go into terminal decline. But in 1903, everything changed again, when Henry Ford invented the automobile, with its internal combustion engine and its need for a source of high-energy fuel. By the 1920s, cars were being mass-produced, electric trams were being decommissioned, and bicycle lanes were being scrapped. The American oil industry was back in business. It was also beginning to run out of its natural resources, and the search began for new sources of fuel that had rapidly become the staple of America's and the world's economy. In the shadow of Bahrain's Jebel al-Dukhan, and surrounded by a tangle of pipelines, stands a grand white stone building. This is the country's oil museum, which was established in 1992 to commemorate the 60th anniversary of the discovery of oil in 1932, in the Kingdom and in the Arabian Gulf. Further discoveries quickly followed, in Saudi Arabia in 1933, in Kuwait in 1938, and in Qatar in 1939. Abu Dhabi joined this exclusive black gold club in 1962, with Oman following suit in 1964, and Dubai 2 years later.
We are mainly desert countries in the GCC, and life was particularly hard, and people used to live basically either from the sea by trade or pearl diving or fishing, or through trading in the Sahara. Of course, when oil was discovered in the late 30s and then produced in abundance in the 50s, that has really transformed all the societies in the Gulf area. It was really a change that transformed the people into the 20th century at the time. And I must say the wealth was spread basically in a fair manner to give the people a better life, both in health, in education, in their welfare, and in their living. And now you can see that all around you in the Gulf area.
Oil bring good things to Kuwait, of course, because we could stay until now fishermen and looking for pearls and doing small business. Oil changed style of our life. We had free education, free health care, good payment, I mean, good style of life, and even invasion come and destroy Kuwait with the money of oil, we could bring it back. I mean, oil, I think it is a nice gift from God to Kuwaiti people.
Those discoveries have had profound implications for the world, not just for the countries where they took place. Over the past 50 years, the Middle East and its oil have rarely been out of the headlines. The first sign of things to come was the founding of OPEC. OPEC came into existence in direct response to US protectionism. In 1960, the US government imposed tariffs on oil imports from the Middle East and Venezuela that were undercutting its domestic producers, and which were also seen to pose a threat to national security. In September of that year, energy ministers from Saudi Arabia, Venezuela, Iran, Iraq and Kuwait met in Baghdad to explore ways of protecting their interests. And OPEC was born. Since then they have been joined by the UAE and Qatar, as well as Algeria, Angola, Ecuador, Libya and Nigeria. The full implications of this alliance did not fully enter the world's consciousness until 1973, when OPEC member states agreed to raise the price of oil by a staggering 73% to $5.11 a barrel. The following day, OPEC's Arab members agreed to stop shipping oil to any countries that had sided with Israel during the Yom Kippur War. The ramifications of this embargo were felt immediately. Oil prices soared to $12 a barrel, and shortages were felt throughout the Western world. It also dramatically altered the way that countries across the world looked at their energy security. The US gave the green light to massive oil exploration projects offshore and in Alaska. Countries such as France and the UK diversified their energy sources with massive investment in natural gas, nuclear power and renewable energy. Japan even changed its focus from oil-heavy industries to electronics and encouraged its car industry to provide smaller, more economic models. Within the oil industry itself, the balance of power had shifted from the super major oil conglomerates to the nationalised oil companies. In the aftermath of the overthrow of the Shah of Iran in 1979, Ayatollah Khomeini nationalised Iran's oil industry and expelled all the super majors operating in the country, along with thousands of skilled oil workers. The move devastated the country's oil sector, and although OPEC moved quickly to ramp up production to plug the hole in supply, the global energy markets panicked. As a result, the price of oil rocketed over the next 12 months from $15.98 to $39.5 a barrel, and the rush to secure supplies caused acute shortages across the world. In 1990, Iraq accused Kuwait of using slant drilling techniques to steal oil from the Iraqi side of the giant Rumalia field that overlaps the border between the two countries. Saddam Hussein used this as an excuse to invade, a decision that was to precipitate two major wars and to cost hundreds of thousands of civilian lives, including, eventually, that of Saddam Hussein himself.
I joined KOC back in 1993. The country was still under the construction after the liberation and what happened during the invasion of the Iraqi forces, and the let's say the immense destruction of all the oil field infrastructure. It was under the build-up, let's say, and all facilities were being actually brought up to their previous limits and levels of production. So I was lucky actually to join KOC, Kuwait Oil Company, back in 1993, where I witnessed actually and participated mainly in the achievements of bringing all the facilities back to the same levels as the national production quota.
Sometimes, however, spectacular rises in oil prices are simply down to circumstances beyond anyone's control. When the cost of oil shot up to over $147 a barrel in 2008, there were no wars being fought and no embargoes being imposed or even threatened. Some put it down to an unprecedented growth in the demand, fueled by booming Western economies and the emergence of developing nations, especially China and India. Others blamed speculative trading on the global commodities markets and a weak dollar.
The conception that OPEC countries or the producers basically in the Gulf manipulate or dictate the price is really a big misconception. I think in OPEC we strive towards creating a market that is stable because it is in the long-term interest of us as producers and of the consumers to have a well-supplied market where the supply and demand are basically in balance and where there are no major variations or volatilities that happen. We do not seek nor do we encourage these volatilities, but a lot of them happen because either due to geopolitical reasons or sometimes because there are paper markets that intervene and speculations which we have no part in that dictate these volatilities and cause them to happen. We are always striving towards having a stable market because we think that this is good for the economy of the world as a whole, and at the end of the day it also serves our interests in the medium and long term.
Oil price volatility will continue to affect the world economy as long as it remains so reliant upon oil. And that will probably be the case for quite some time to come. In 2010, driven by the same booming BRIC economies of Brazil, India, Russia and China that may have been responsible for the 2008 spike, global oil consumption grew by 35% to 2.7 billion barrels a day. Even the most conservative estimates forecast that demand for oil will have increased by at least 20% over 2007 levels by 2030. Contrary to popular belief, this is not necessarily all good news for the oil-producing nations. Although high oil prices have clearly generated unprecedented wealth for the GCC states, they can also inflate the prices of goods and services for domestic consumers, which are not necessarily offset by wage increases.
We like the prices of oil to be reasonable, to be fair for us and for the outside world. Too high a price may not be necessarily for the advantage of Kuwait, either in the short or in the long term. Number one, that could have a detrimental effect on the demand for oil in the future, where other forms of energy may become more economic, and that could serve not to our interests in the future, in the medium or on the long term. At the same time, we would like to have a budget that is more or less balanced. We don't like to see too much excess that could drive us towards policies or actions that could be very comfortable in the short range but do not serve us in the long term.
And, as the spikes of 1980 and 2008 illustrate, the price of crude is not necessarily in the hands of the oil producers. As the countries across the Arab Peninsula seek to diversify their economies, high oil prices will lead to a high cost base, which can in turn undermine their competitiveness in the export markets. Like other countries across the world, the countries of the GCC increasingly rely on stability, not volatility, for steady economic growth.
God has blessed us in all of the Gulf Cooperation Council countries with plentiful of supplies and reserve of both oil and gas, although there are of course certain particularities. For instance, in Qatar they are rich with gas. In Kuwait we have a lot of oil. In Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates and Oman, there are also plentiful supplies or reserves of sweet crudes that are used by consumers everywhere. We coordinate our oil policies within the Gulf Cooperation Council. Again, we think that we need to have a responsible role in having, as I said earlier, a vibrant but a stable oil industry, that the market is well supplied, and we always look for good, stable relationship with the consumers everywhere, whether they are in the Americas or in Europe or in Asia. And we also invest abroad as a further way of us cementing these relationships with them.
The region is fully dependent on hydrocarbon and oil and gas, not only in fueling its economic development, but also in transforming this into productive energy. So we have now a refining industry of the oil and gas, we have petrochemicals based on oil and gas. The energy sector is of course of utmost importance to the GCC. It makes a very large percentage of their GDP, but it also makes an even larger percentage in terms of their foreign income and government revenues. It plays a very stabilizing role in terms of oil prices through coordination of their GCC policies within OAPEC and OPEC. But we are also going beyond that to look at the future of energy and the future of alternative energy.
Since it was first established, the GCC has taken an increasingly central role in helping its member states to balance the needs of the world economy with their own domestic requirements. The countries of the Arabian Gulf are both guides and fellow travellers on the journey of oil.